I have attended the Alderton Civic Dinner every year since 1987, which means I have sat through 37 of them. I say this not to boast, but to explain how well I know the room. The long mahogany tables, the regimental portraits between the pilasters, the drafts that come in under the east doors when someone steps out to the car park, and the Bechstein concert grand in the far corner that nobody, in all those 37 years, has ever once heard played. It stands behind a velvet rope on ordinary evenings, and on dinner nights like this one, the rope comes down, but the piano remains exactly as it always is, polished, closed, and silent, like a very expensive piece of furniture. I am a retired headmistress. 40 years running, Alderton Girls' Grammar tells you certain things about human nature that no other profession can. You learn to read a room in 3 seconds. Who is performing, who is afraid, who is precisely as confident as they appear, and who is hiding something worth finding. It is not a glamorous skill. It is simply the result of watching people, unobserved, for 4 decades. I mention it because what I am about to describe is something I saw with those 40 years behind my eyes, and I have been turning it over ever since. The way you turn a stone you found on a beach and cannot quite bring yourself to put down. The evening was the first Friday of November. The guest of honor was Sir Edmund Farrow, the Lord Lieutenant of the county, a tall man of 70, with the careful posture of someone who has been told since childhood that bearing is character. He arrived late and made rather a production of it, shaking hands down the length of the room before the starter was cleared, pausing for the portraits as though he recognized old friends. He was not unkind. He was simply a man who had never in his life had cause to wonder whether people were pleased to see him, and so had never developed the reflex of wondering. Wilfrid Skeets had been setting up the room since 4 o'clock that afternoon. I know this, because I arrived early. I always do. Habit. And found him there. A compact, deliberate man of 69 in a gray council waistcoat, moving between the tables with the unhurried precision of someone who has long since stopped needing to think about the work. Wilfrid has been caretaker and odd jobs man at the Alderton Civic Hall for 31 years. Before that, he spent 42 years as a compositor at the Alderton Courier, setting type by hand in the early decades, then overseeing the transition to digital typesetting, then retiring at 62 when the paper was absorbed by a regional group and the old press floor closed for good. He is not a man who talks about himself. In 31 years at this hall, I doubt he has said more than 3 consecutive sentences about his own history to anyone. I saw him pause at the Bechstein as he was setting out the last of the name cards on the piano's end of the room. He did not sit down. He did not lift the fallboard. He simply rested one hand, very lightly, on the closed lid. The way you might rest a hand on the shoulder of an old friend you are passing in a corridor, and then moved on to the next table. I noted it. I do not know why. I file things. Dinner was served at 7. Sir Edmund was placed at the head of the principal table, naturally, with the civic mayor to his left and the deputy Lord Lieutenant to his right. By the time the fish course was cleared, he had relaxed into the kind of expansive good humor that men of his type produce when they are comfortable and well fed and feel that an evening is going according to its proper order. The room had that particular buzz. 55 people, formal dress, the candles lit, the crystal catching, and I was seated near the piano end, which is where I always request, because it is the quietest part of the room, and I can hear the person next to me without leaning in. It was during the interval between the fish and the main that Wilfrid came through to check the temperature setting on the east radiator. He crossed behind the long tables, nodded to the guests he passed, and stopped at the Bechstein to straighten the small arrangement of white chrysanthemums that had been placed on its closed lid. He was doing nothing more than that. But the fallboard, I noticed, was not quite closed. One of the catering staff must have lifted it earlier and not pushed it flush. And when Wilfrid straightened the flowers, the lid shifted slightly and a strip of the white keys came into view. He looked at them, only for a moment, but Sir Edmund, from 30 feet away at the head of the table, had turned in his chair and was watching. "You there," Sir Edmund said. The room did not go quiet. He did not raise his voice enough for that, but the people near us looked up. "Since you're right there at the instrument, give us something befitting the occasion. A little background music. Something simple, man, to fill the interval." There was a ripple of laughter from the tables nearest Sir Edmund, the polite, reflexive laughter of people who are agreeing that something is light and harmless. Wilfred looked up. He looked at Sir Edmund for a moment, with an expression I could not immediately name. It was not embarrassment, it was not defiance. It was more like the expression of a compositor checking a proof he has already set, and already knows to be correct. "If you like," he said. He moved the chrysanthemums to the side table. He lifted the fallboard the rest of the way, and set it on its prop. He pulled the bench out, not the perfunctory pull of someone sitting down in a hurry, but 2 precise half-turns of the height knob, made without looking at his hands, the adjustment already known. He sat. He placed his hands in his lap for a moment. The nearest guests had turned in their seats. The ripple of laughter had already subsided, replaced by the particular silence that happens when a room is not sure what it has just agreed to watch. He put his hands on the keys. The first note of the handle air is not a shout. It does not announce itself. It is a single voice, calm and unhurried, like the opening line of a letter you did not know you needed to receive. Wilfred played it at a tempo that gave each note room to exist before the next one arrived. Not slowly, exactly, but with the patience of a man who has spent 42 years placing letters one by one in a composing stick, and has learned that space between things is not emptiness, it is structure. The air is 8 bars, repeated. By the end of the first 8, the table nearest the piano had gone quiet. By the repeat, I could hear it spreading, the conversations dying back, one cluster at a time, the cutlery going still. People were not making a decision to stop talking. They were simply finding that the music had occupied the space where their words had been, and there was no room left for both. Then the first variation. The melody is still there, but now it moves, the right hand breaking into running passages of 16th notes, clean and even, each one placed with the same deliberateness as the air but faster, so that the precision becomes dazzling rather than calm. I am not a musician. I cannot tell you the technical name for what he was doing with the inner voices in the left hand, the way they answered the runs in the right, with something that was almost a conversation. What I can tell you is that it sounded exact. Not mechanical, exact. The way a very fine piece of cabinetry is exact. You see it, and you know that someone made the measurements and held to them without excusing themselves. The second variation was quieter, and somehow more insistent. The running figures moved to the left hand. The right held the melody, and Wilfred played it simply, without ornament, which is a harder thing to do than ornamentation, because there is nowhere to hide. By this point the room was completely still. 55 people who had come for a civic dinner were sitting with their hands in their laps, and their faces turned toward a 69-year-old man in a gray council waistcoat, who an hour ago had been straightening chrysanthemums. I looked at Sir Edmund. He had not moved from his chair. His fork was beside his plate. He was watching Wilfred the way you watch something that has confounded a category you did not know you held. The third variation brought the 16th notes back, alternating between both hands in a kind of chase, one hand picking up where the other left off, the theme still present underneath if you knew to listen for it. And Wilfred played it with a looseness that surprised me, a slight forward lean in the shoulders, as though the precision had settled so deep into the fingers that the rest of him could afford to ease. There is a word for this that I taught to my students for 40 years when we discussed great writing. Unself-conscious. The very best command of a thing looks like no effort at all, because the effort has been completed long before the performance began. I thought about what I knew of Wilfred Skeets. 31 years at this hall. 42 years before that at the Courier. He came in at 7 in the morning and left when the building was secure. He had a sister in Northampton and a sister-in-law in Shrewsbury. He drank his tea without sugar and brought his own sandwiches. I had spoken to him perhaps 200 times over the years, about the heating, about a blocked drain, once about a faulty lock on the fire door that took 3 phone calls to get repaired. It occurred to me, as the fourth variation began, that in 31 years, I had never once asked him who he was when he was not at this hall. I had simply assumed the answer was this. The fourth variation is the most ornate, and Wilfred played it without slowing, the right hand cascading, the left anchoring, the dynamics shifting between phrases with a lightness that, in a concert hall with 1,000 seats, would have brought people forward to the edge of those seats. In a civic dining room with 55 people, and candles burning down, it did something quieter. It simply made the room very large and very small at the same time. Large because the music seemed to need more space than the room contained. Small because every person in it felt, I think, as though the music was for them alone. And then the fifth variation, the last, which handle marks à la brève, meaning it moves, meaning the double bar lines go by fast, meaning that what has taken 4 variations to gather now arrives. The theme is broken into hammered chords, both hands, the rhythm driving forward with a confidence that is almost joyful, and Wilfred played it exactly so. Not rushed, not loud, but full. The Bechstein's full voice, the room's full attention, the man at the keyboard giving not a performance but a fact, the way a good compositor gives you a fact, when he hands you a finished proof, and you look at it, and cannot find a single error. The final chord landed, and he lifted his hands and sat. There was a moment, 2 seconds, 3, of complete silence. Not the silence of uncertainty, the silence of a room that has just received something it did not have the category for, and is taking the moment it needs to make room. Then someone behind me began to clap, and then the whole room was standing, and I was standing with them, though I cannot tell you precisely when I rose. Sir Edmund stood last. I watched him do it. The chair pushed back carefully, the napkin set aside, the long, careful posture coming upright. He clapped with his hands held at chest height, the way men of his generation sometimes do, and his face had shed, entirely, the expression he had worn all evening, the ease of a man among his proper surroundings. In its place was something simpler. He was looking at Wilfred the way you look at a truth you have just been handed by someone you underestimated, and which you know you will carry with you because it is too large to put down. Wilfred closed the fallboard. He turned the bench back to its original height, 2 half-turns of the knob, the same precision in reverse, and he stood and straightened the chrysanthemums on the side table and went back to checking the east radiator. No one spoke to him for several minutes. The applause had finished and the room was finding its way back to conversation, slowly, the way you find your way back to a road after cutting across an open field. The mayor eventually went over. I could not hear what was said. Wilfred nodded. I did not go over that evening. I am not sure what I would have said. What I keep returning to, when I think about it, is this. 42 years, a man set type for a living, arranged letters into meaning, one by one, with his hands, and then 31 years more of this hall, the east radiator, the chrysanthemums, the Bechstein that nobody played, and in all that time, the music was there, in the same hands, patient as type, waiting to be inked. I have been a headmistress, as I said. I have spent my life believing I can read a room. I think about what Wilfred showed me that November evening, and I have come to believe that the most important rooms are the ones we have never thought to look inside.